already know how we do. We're not going to play around when it comes to this knowledge. We're going to steady move forward. We're steady going to be obtaining what we need to know to be able to be the best that we can be. To get away from all the falsities that have kept us blind, that have taken away our power, that have taken away our knowing of where we truly come from. With all these falsities that they've consistently put in front of us to keep us blinded from the truth of how much power you really have. But to understand that power, or even get to that point, you have to understand where you come from, your history, the correct history, especially here within North America, especially within Central and South America. This is the land. If you're from here, this is your land. You know what's up, and it's time to do it right. So we're going to be in this book here called Self Culture. It's a magazine of knowledge, actually. It's a volume 5, April to September in 1897. It was edited by G. Mercer Adam. What we're going to be doing here is we're going to be diving into this section in the heart of the Mound Builders country. Some of it's illustrated, but I'm just going to read alongside. I'm going to read. Again, I don't like to just come through and then give my own interpretation or overall view, I guess, just of what I've read. And I'd rather just read it with you and we just get it overstanding completely. I think that's the best way to do all this. It takes time to learn and know great things, but knowledge is power, so let's keep it going. The prehistoric people known as the Mound Builders and the great earthworks which they have left as evidence of their occupation of our country are embraced as a very vague and misty conception in the consciousness of the average well-informed citizen. Isn't that true? What do they tell us today? Who's responsible? Now they say it's the Native Americans these days. The archaeologist and the dweller in the vicinity of the mightiest earth remains realize their importance, and every intelligent tourist who becomes antiquated or acquainted with the relics of the ancient race is strongly impressed with them and the wonders that works so great have been so little exploited. He reflects that the remains far less extensive and interesting in Europe. You hear that? I'll start it again. He reflects that the remains far less extensive and interesting in Europe have been made familiar to his mind, while those in our own land have been left in obscurity, so far as popular proclaiming of their character and extent is concerned. There's a reason for that. There's a reason for that. Because the ancient race has been commonly called mound builders. Doesn't sound too great, does it? Mound, they built a mound. The impression has popularly prevailed that the earthworks left by them are limited to a few scattered mounds only, and the common conception of the people that built them is correspondingly contracted. See? Just by calling it mound builders, it doesn't even sound that great. Again, confusion and belittlement have ensued from the careless calling of the tumuli Indian mounds, which implies that they were the product of a race we know by that name. And this very considerably detracts from their significance. Now, one of high intelligence, or let's just not even say one of high intelligence, let's just say one that has studied this well enough knows that the Indians did not do these. None of the Indians that were found at the time. These are ancient works. The start of civilization. The beginning of all civilization is our mound builders. And we're going to keep going for everyone until everyone understands this. As a matter of fact, we have extending for thousands of miles through the great valley of the Mississippi and along the waters of its tributaries from the Gulf of Mexico to Lake Superior and from the Alleghanies to the eastern slope of the Rocky Mountains, a vast system of works, many of which are elaborate and extensive, exhibiting great skill on the part of their builders, and as a whole demonstrating beyond doubt to the careful student that they were the work of a distant and distinct race, and a powerful and intelligent one. Thus, the subject becomes invested with a peculiar dignity and importance that grows more and more upon the observing upon the observing and meditating mind as one realizes that the thousands of grassy mounds which dot the landscape, together with the miles of winding walls and the great enclosures which constitute the ancient earth remains, contains a message to mankind from a mighty nation which long ago passed behind the great black curtain of oblivion. Long ago, y'all. I know I be getting hype a lot of the times. Right now, I need this to sink in. We're going to go through it, and we're going to bring you all the way back home. The man who once comes to an adequate appreciation of the variety and vast extents of the works by actual observation must, in some degree, though of course dimly at best, see the vanished race rise before him, and again people the region of the mounds and the mighty circumvallations upon the hills and the plains. In other words, the knowledge that one gains from the earth walls and tumuli creates an atmosphere which renders possible the projection of a pale and vague phantasm of the race that once lived here in the flesh. And herein lies the allurement and fascination of the study of the mounds, a spell which exerts its sway more or less over all, even the least imaginative who becomes familiar with these mysterious remains. So you see what happens. Straight up telling you, right off the bat, they're using their fantasy to create and tie in something that would possibly make them seem as though they're older. Fantasies all the way. Fantasies are being projected all over the place, especially at this time, and it's still happening today. It will go far toward establishing at the outset a better understanding of the mound builder remains if the reader fixes in his mind this very simple classification. First of all, that the system of works consists of two great classes. Number one, the simple mounds or tumuli, and two, the enclosures. The former are usually subdivided by students into three classes. Number one being the mounds of sepulture, by far the most numerous. Number two, the altar or sacrificial mound. Number three, the temple or platform mound, similar to the teocalli or temple-crowned mounds of Mexico and Central America. Number four, which are signal mounds. Number five, the effigy mounds, principally occurring in the northwestern states, particularly in Wisconsin and Minnesota. There is also a class of works peculiar to Michigan and Wisconsin and the other northwestern states called garden beds. The general class of works termed enclosures are divided for reasons readily revealing themselves into one, sacred and miscellaneous enclosures, and two, works of defense, commonly called forts. A third and entirely distinct class of works are the graded ways, of which, however, there are only a few examples in the whole country. The tumuli, which so profusely dot the landscape in the best portions of southern Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Missouri, West Virginia, Kentucky, and generally speaking, the valley regions of the Ohio and Mississippi rivers, are usually of the simple conical form, much flattened, and varying from a diameter of 10 feet and a height of 3 feet to such great structures as the Grave Creek Mound in West Virginia, the monster of the Ohio Valley, with a height of 70 feet and a diameter of 300, or the mammoth Cahokia Mound on the Illinois side of the Mississippi, below St. Louis, which is the largest mound in North America, and has a height of more than 100 feet. 9 out of the 10 of the common mounds are sepulchral, or burial mounds, as is evidenced by the finding of human remains at their bases, but a few cover altars on which sacrificial fires once burned. That others were primarily designed as the places from which signals might be made is clearly revealed by a little study. Of the enclosures, the class that is by far the most numerous is that denominated sacred enclosures, which term was long years ago applied to and still remains by common consent the general appellation of all those works, usually lying in the valleys and embodying more or less regulatory of structure, or the combination of regular forms, as of the circle and square. Of course, their use is largely conjectural, right? You hear that? Of course, their use is largely conjectural, meaning that they're going to say that they are those type of mounds so that they cannot go into them. They're going to say, oh, well, we have to hold things sacred now. We have to not go into them. We don't want to be disrespectful. I'm pretty sure that they doing that for a reason. And the term sacred enclosures, therefore, more or less fanciful, and yet not entirely without a rational basis. They may have been, and doubtless were, the general assembly places of the populace, and devoted to various functions and occasions. Yet there is evidence that the religious purpose was a common one, and hence the term sacred enclosures is most satisfactory and definitive. It is obvious, as, almost without exception, the works of this class occur in the immediate valleys, that they were not primarily designed as places of defense, though they could, and doubtless often did, serve that end in an emergency, and their substantial earth walls from 6 to 30 feet in height, especially when surmounted by palisades, of which there is frequent evidence, would form no mean barrier against the enemy. It is just as obvious that the other class of enclosures were designed primarily and principally for works of defense. The so-called forts were formidable fastnesses. In fact, it would appear that they were almost absolutely impregnable to any assaults that could have been made upon them in the ancient days. Briefly described, they are walled hills, forts upon precipice tops, the embankments, and these usually being formed of stone instead of earth, and carried around the comparatively level summits of the hills just at their edges. They often enclose areas of isolated hilltops amounting to 40, 50, or even more than 100 acres. And some of them, it is easy to be seen, might have afforded a place of refuge and defense to tens of thousands of people through a long siege. Such was the vantage that their location and construction afforded that each man at the walls of these hill fortresses could have held a score or 100 assailants in check. The great size and number of these defensive works, and of the still more numerous and extensive enclosures commonly called sacred, especially in such religions as that of the Scioto and Miami valleys in Ohio, is proof positive that it was a very large population that resided there and reared them. Indeed, it seems not improbable that in these immediate localities the country was as fully peopled in the ancient times as it is today. The magnitude and profusion of the works, too, afford a convincing proof of the dominance of a strong government, of a remarkable fixedness of purpose, and of a long occupation of the country. For without the existence of those conditions, it is inconceivable that such vast public works could have been constructed. So, too, the conviction arises irresistibly that there was among the people at least a sufficiently high degree of civilization to render them an agricultural race, for it is impossible that such great masses of men as must have toiled to rear the many miles of earth embankments and the countless thousands of mounds could have subsisted on the products of the chase. The mere fact that a population so large and advanced existed here being thus attested, many other ideas concerning the ancient race followed by process of natural inference. There seems reason to believe that the seat of empire of the ancient people was in central Ohio. From the frequency with which the mounds and larger works occur in the southern portion of that state and of Illinois, it is evident that these two regions were the most densely populated by the mound builders, and as between the two, the far greater number of tumuli and the predominance of extensive works in the Ohio field points to that as the region of densest population. Inferentially, it was the center of government, the true heart of the mound builder country. For the reason here suggested, and also because the writer is best acquainted with the works in the Ohio field, having examined personally many of the more elaborate ones there, he will dwell chiefly upon the remains in that region, as illustrating the nature and achievements of the lost people. It is well enough to say, however, at the outstart, that while this is generally regarded as the richest region for research in this department of archaeology, the largest mound of all in the country, the great Cahokia tumulus, is in Illinois, and the next largest, the almost equally famous Grave Creek Mound, is in West Virginia, though, upon the Ohio River. These facts, while not weakening the original statement, attest the wide spreading of the ancient population and enforce attention to the fact that while the greatest numerical strength of the race was very probably in the valleys of the southern Ohio, there were also bodies of the same people, by no means insignificant in numbers, inhabiting districts remote from there. And this idea is further impressed by the circumstance that while the Scioto Valley, central southern Ohio, is certainly of all localities in the northern states the richest in great enclosures of embankments, the most immense enclosure of all known is far away from that region, in a northeasterly direction, near Newark, Licking County, Ohio. Having thus conveyed some idea of the relative richness of the Ohio archaeological field, there remains the taste of exhibiting something of the actual numerical wealth of the works, together with some details as to the more important examples of the several classes. To obtain an adequate idea of the vast profusion of the remains, a few figures will be of service. 40-odd years ago, Squire and Davis, the first able and thorough investigators of this archaeological field, affirmed that in the state of Ohio alone, the number of tumuli was safely estimated at 10,000, and the number of enclosures at from 1,000 to 1,500. Recent computations of the number make them very much larger. When one reflects that each of the latter classes of works, excepting perhaps very small ones in groups, must represent the site of a village or organized settlement, strong evidence is adduced in support of the theory that the country was occupied by a very large population. This class of works is most numerous along the large streams tributary to the Ohio and upon the latter waterway itself, but usually it is noticeable at those points where it receives the waters of its affluents. The Scioto and the two Miamis seem to have been the most favored valleys, and there existed the seats of the densest population. Although the scattered remains, large and small, are scattered more or less numerously throughout the state and in the contiguous territory of West Virginia and Pennsylvania, where the Allegheny River marks their eastern boundary. It is worthy of remark that 7/10 of the whole number and all of the larger works are in the southern half of the state. A map showing all of the works would very clearly indicate that in this general region the prehistoric population was located with some relation to the advantages of the beautiful river, precisely as farther west the Mississippi would appear the dominating geographical feature in the grouping of the people. But while the general showing of such map, as has been alluded to, would be indicated, there would be also revealed very great differences in the relative profusion of works and density of population in various portions of the Ohio basin, and as well as in that of the Mississippi. Most crowded of all at present with earth remains, as it was of old with the toiling thousands of the mysterious race who reared them, would appear to be the fertile valley of the famous picturesque Scioto, which divides southern Ohio by a north and south line from above Columbus to the Ohio River at Portsmouth. Adown this lovely valley, within an area 100 miles in length and a score of miles in breadth, it is safe to say that there are nearly 2,000 separate works of the Mound Builders, large and small. In Ross County, which includes Chillicothe, near which town the most important find of sepultured remains known in the history of Ohio archaeology was recently made at Copper Cross Mound. There are not far from 500 mounds and about 100 enclosures. That there must have been the ancient seat of empire is an almost irresistible conclusion. A section of 12 miles of this valley, embracing as its central point the city of Chillicothe, exhibits 10 groups of large works, 4 of which have 2.5 miles of embankment each, 2 others enclosing an area of 100 acres each. 100 acres. While the remaining ones are scarcely inferior in size. Paint Creek, an affluent of the Scioto at Chillicothe, and its charming valley, walled by bold bluffs, was seemingly as fully appreciated by the ancient people as the larger basin was. A section of 6 miles along its course reveals 3 works about equal in size to those on the Scioto and 3 lesser ones. The face of the country, round about and far away, upland as well as valley, is dotted with little conical mounds or tumuli, which are, throughout this region, so common as to excite comparatively little interest save by their large aggregate, or where peculiar features are presented. Further up the Scioto are other extensive works. At Circleville, Pickaway County, was a great circle from which the town takes its name, and in this case the name is absolutely all that is left of one of the most remarkable of the Mound Builders' works. See, they came through and destroyed it, bro. Now what's really amazing too is that this Circleville might even have been Atlantis itself, with all those circles that they be talking about, concentric circles, because we know that a lot of these mounds that they was building actually was in relation to water as well. And we'll get into that here in a little bit. For the people who settled there with a zeal worthy of a better cause swept the peculiarity, massive and regular walls from the plain as effectually as a schoolboy may erase from his slate a problem which he cannot solve. To the southward also, in Pike County, is the famous graded way. At Piketon, a rare type of this quite scarce work, in which heavy parallel embankments flank a broad, beautifully graded avenue sloping to the river. And right here in this picture you can see how they show the side views of the mounds and just how big they are in relation to the actual works. Again, this is 27 acres, 40 acres, and we'll look at some photos here in a little bit afterwards, some illustration. The Liberty Works, as they are commonly called, are among the larger enclosures near Chillicothe, and present the oft-recurring combination of the circle and the square, of which another Scioto Valley example is afforded by the Hopeton Works, north of Chillicothe. The larger circle of the Liberty enclosure is 1,700 feet in diameter, or very nearly a third of a mile, and the smaller circle is 800 feet in diameter. The former encloses an area of 40 acres. Imagine that, y'all. It's just astronomically huge, man. And the adjoining square, measuring 1,050 feet, encloses an area of 27 acres. There are several small mounds in and about this immense work, and one large tumulus, oval in form, about 150 feet in length by 20 in height. The walls of this work are not as heavy in proportion to their length as are those of some others, but save in this respect, it is a fairly representative work of a larger class. The Hopetown works exhibit far more massive walls, those of one of the enclosures being even at the present day fully 12 feet high. Even at the present day, so we talking about with all the strata that has accumulated on top, it's still at that time point 12 feet high, and broad enough upon the crest to accommodate a horse and a carriage as easily as does the average country road. Here have been discovered, in the top of the embankments, traces of palings, which once surmounted them, and at either side of a broad entrances were found traces of massive timbers, which indicated that the gaps had once been closed by some form of gates or barricades. Sophistication, y'all. These works present a combination of several forms of enclosure, the principal figures being the circle and the peculiar octagon so compressed as to be easily mistaken for a square, and low but long extending parallel walls stretching across the level bottom lands towards the river, but terminating at the first terrace, where perhaps the river flowed when they were constructed centuries ago. The plentifulness and variety of these works in the valley of the Scioto, together with the vastness of some of them, make it seem quite natural that this should have been the locality of the find of the most important and imposing mortuary remains ever discovered among the relics of the ancient race. And this recent remarkable unearthing supplies cumulative evidence to the theory that this was indeed the seat of empire of the Mound Builders. The discovery alluded to was made by Warren K. Moorhead working under the auspices of Professor F. W. Putnam of Harvard College. A vast number of mounds have been excavated in the past half-century in various parts of the Mound Builders country, and hundreds, perhaps thousands of skeletons have been exhumed, together with a great variety of implements and ornaments, principally of stone, and also some of copper. But the distinguishing features of this exhumation were the evidences of unusual pomp of sepulture, so far surpassing all others that it would unequivocally indicate that this was the tomb of the most exalted personage who had existed among the prehistoric people, or at least of one who was of greater prestige than any of those whose graves have been laid bare by investigators. These circumstances, together with the finding among an unprecedented wealth of copper objects remarkably fine in workmanship of several peculiar crosses, made the excavation of the great effigy mound in the Hopewell group on Paint Creek near Chillicothe an epochal discovery in American archaeology. The swastika cross, as it is called, it should be observed, it is a distinctly oriental form, and seemingly throws a faint gleam of light on the antecedents of the mysterious mound builder race. The Hopewell group of works, the scene of this discovery, which more than any other has interested the students of the mounds. Now, I want to go back too, because when they're talking about the swastika, they always want to relate it as it was brought over here, but y'all not seeing it right. You gotta understand that we brought it over there. All of these works predate everything. Everything. The sophistication, it predates everything as far as the start of civilization is concerned. When we go through these works and these pictures, and I'm not sure how much you've looked into them, but these are beyond what is out there. I mean, literally, the massive, I'll wait till we get to the pictures. So the Hopewell group of works, the scene of this discovery, which more than any other has interested the students of the mounds, consisted of an enclosure, the embankments of which extended nearly 2 miles, several lesser enclosures, and a group of 26 mounds. It was in the largest of these, the now famous effigy or copper cross mound, bearing a rude resemblance to the human trunk and measuring 500 by 210 feet, with a height of 23 feet, and the bones of the distinguished ancient had their 1,000 years, at least, of stately sepulture. The skeleton was one of a dozen or more, but the distinction which had been accorded to the man who once had animated these crumbling bones was very plainly indicated by the profusion of ornament and insignia with which the body had been invested when laid to rest. Upon the skull, surmounting a copper helmet, were branching antlers, well fashioned, of the same metal, and upon the breast and back were plates of copper, which had formed together with the helmet a rude armor. The body had been covered with a tunic or skirt of coarse cloth, and the neck, arms, and ankles were enriched with copper bracelets, beads, and pearl, and shell, and bear's teeth. Besides these was an immense deposit of the objects, for the most part common to the sepulchral mounds, but far exceeding in size and variety, and also in the plentifulness of the copper ornaments and implements and other finds. Among the latter was an enormous copper axe weighing 38 pounds, and numerous objects supposed to have significance as totems, as well as the crosses already mentioned. There were over 7,000 flint implements and about 25,000 pearl and shell beads. Such, in brief, was the great find made in the region richest in mound builder remains of all in the valleys of the Ohio and Mississippi. There are remarkable remains in other localities of Ohio, and the most unique of all in some respects are to be found at Marietta, the site of the first settlement in the state by the present race, which, as the Indians also long maintained a town there, is the third family of mankind which has exhibited a marked preference for the spot. The greater part of the plain, at the confluence of the Muskingum and Ohio, on which the present town stands, was originally covered with a large rectangular enclosure and other works. The early settlers here, however, took measures for the preservation of many of the works, and among the remaining ones now carefully protected are elevated squares, truncated pyramids, or platforms of earth with graded approaches or ascents, in some cases recessed, in some projecting. These are almost unique in the north, but very common in Mexico and Central America, where they are known as teocalli and form the supporting structures of great temples. So, yeah, similarities, commonalities, which one's older, which one predates, which one is a little bit more rude in form, how many layers of strata, right? So if they're resembling Central America, then we can logically deduce that they come from North America, where it originated. It is a perfectly reasonably conjecture that they also did in this locality, but that here, the surmounting temples being of wood or other perishable material instead of adobe or stone, as at the south, have long since decayed. See? So they was using perishable items before, then they learned as they went south and time moved along. They got greater and greater in their works, down towards the south central Yucatan. So, a graded way is also preserved at Murrieta, and it is the best example of this very rare class of works in the whole country, being much larger than the one at Piketon on the Scioto. It is a broad, perfectly graded incline, cut down like a street through the high plain to the river's edge, the Muskingum. It measures 680 feet in length by 150 feet in breadth. What could this and the few other graded ways in existence have been used for by the mound builders, if not as a huge boat or raft launches? It's a great question. Imagine. Let yourself go back. Let yourself hear these words and try and figure it out and pull it from the ether of what you remember, of what is true, is what dates back. These works occur only contiguous to the large water courses, near which also are most of the large enclosures and mounds, indicating that their builders had more than a merely accidental predilection for proximity to navigable streams. And why, if they did not make a practical use of them. So again, right here he's showing in this Murrieta works, which we'll get into a little bit detail later, but that they built up embankments so that they could easily launch off their boats and rafts rather than just being canoes. At this point in time, there was, the rivers were flowing a lot bigger, which gave them eligibility to make bigger and bigger ships. So our rivers were flowing at a way bigger rate than they are now. A large conical mound 30 feet high in the present burying ground at Murrieta is one of the best specimens of tumuli in the northern states and is unique in being surrounded by an embankment and fosse. This mound was one of the first excavated anywhere in the country and had for its explorer in 1788 no less a personages than the famous Dr. Manasseh Cutler of the Massachusetts, agent of the Ohio Company, which formed the settlement here, and author of the Ordinance of Freedom, the find, which was unimportant. A single skeleton merely was discovered about midway between the apex and the base of the tumulus, and it is probable that had the excavation been pushed to the base, a more interesting discovery would have been made. It is possible that there still exists there, uninvaded, a sepulture chamber, for many of the larger mounds have been found to contain two, in vertical line below the apex. Among such being the Great Mound on the Ohio at the mouth of Grave Creek, West Virginia. The early settlers of Murrieta, who were nothing if not classical, gave Greek and Latin names to the ancient works, by which they are known locally to the present day as Capitolium and Quadranahu, applied to the elevated squares at Sacravia, to the graded way. Of the effigy mounds, the chief field is southern Wisconsin, and some contiguous territory in the northwest, But there are several in Ohio, and one of the greatest of all occurs there, the famous Great Serpent Mound of Adams County. It is a giant basso relievo of earth forming a serpent lying extended in graceful curves with its tail in a triple coil upon the summit of a hill near Brush Creek. Upwards of 1,000 feet in length, the embankment comprising the body being 5 feet in height, with the base at the middle of 30 feet, diminishing very nicely and naturally towards the head and tail. This colossal representation strikes one with something very akin to awe, which is not lessened by the significance that in all of the remains of the ancient Mexican and Central American races, the serpent is shown to have been, in the minds of their builders, the symbol of life and power. In case of the Adams County figure, the gigantic reptile has its vast jaws extended and holds between them the form of an egg, which of course recalls the ancient serpent and egg myth. This work, which has been long known and visited by archaeologists from the whole country, is well preserved, and there is assurance that it will continue to be, for the ground on which it lies is now property of Harvard College. For many years, this work enjoyed the distinction, if not of being positively unique, at least of being the largest of effigy remains in Ohio, or perhaps in the entire country. But lately, a far larger serpent has been traced near Monroe in Warren County, in the same quarter of the state as Adams County in the southwestern. Portions of this work have, unfortunately, been destroyed, but a corps of men who have investigated it under the orders of Professor Putnam of Harvard have determined that the body of the monster serpent extended its undulating lines for a distance of at least 1,900 feet. See how they did it? We didn't have one, we had two, and the bigger one they had to destroy. The bigger one they had to clear out. They had to see what was all in there. They wasn't trying to let this ride at all. They had to suppress the truth. The greater part of the body of this serpent is enveloped in the forest and the massive head, which chanced to lie in a field given over the process of clearing, and the plow has been obliterated. On the rounded body of the serpent are growing massive trees which are centuries old, while the rotted remains of equally large ones lie among them, and the whole surface of the region is covered to the depth of a foot or more with leaf mold and loam, the product of centuries of decay since the great serpent was molded upon the face of the earth. Of the works of defense, which form a very interesting class, of which the very best examples are in the Ohio field, not much has yet been said, attesting less the civilization of the Mound Builders than their warlike character and that foresightedness, prudence, and patience which enabled them to make elaborate and effective preparation for their self-preservation. These works cannot be ignored by those who would form a proper conception of the people who once held possession of the Great Valleys. The most notable examples of this class of works are a fortified hill in Butler County, with quite intricately and ingeniously defended entrances that heretofore alluded to on Paint Creek, Fort Hill in Highland County, in which an area of 48 acres on an isolated elevation rising ruggedly, precipitously from Brush Creek is enclosed by an embankment of earth and stone, and Fort Ancient in Warren County, in which is shown distinctive evidence of the same sagacity and skill of the people who were its builders, and who, doubtless, were more than once besieged within its walls. It is scarcely probable that the people who built this class of works resided permanently within them. Near most of them, others are to be traced, of the more regular and carefully built class, commonly called sacred enclosures. Sacred enclosures, yeah, of course. Here they're showing how, and we'll get into this Fort Hill on the Highland. This is notably the case at Fort Hill, where the remains of a village are to be seen in the valley near at hand, the usual abode, it is conjectured, of the colony, which fortified the hill crest as a place of ready refuge in emergency. Greatest of all the groups of works in Ohio, and presenting in the elements which constitute it examples of almost every class or division of the ancient remains, is the system near Newark, Licking County. When this portion of the state was first settled, the fact was revealed to to the astonished pioneers that a former race had thought so well of then forest-grown country that in a dim, uncertain age antedating the hoarest monarch of that forest, they had toiled there in the building of enclosures which embraced 12 miles of walls. 12 miles of walls. Dude. Besides numerous detached works and tumuli. Of these, the most magnificent, extensive, and intricate of the Mound Builders' works, not only in Ohio, but in the whole region of the northern states, a considerable portion has been preserved, and are the mecca of hundreds of archaeological pilgrimages. The works occupy an area of 2 miles square and originally pretty thoroughly covered that expanse. The walls, some of them 35 feet in height, but many of them far less altitude, and their labyrinthine character, the strange forms of the effigy mounds, as the eagle and the alligator, the unmistakable evidences of colossal labor expended upon them, the skill in design and accuracy of measurements and proportions impress even the most solid observer with the dignity of the race that reared them, and with their numerical extent. High degree of knowledge of numbers. High degree. Here, as truly as at Palenque or Uxmal, was a forest-buried city, vast, mysterious, and, as ever, where antiquity and insoluble mystery confront the beholder, awe-compelling. To construct such works, even to this day, with the aid of the horsepower and labor-enhancing implements, would require the employment for a number of years of an army of many thousands of men. But in dwelling upon the fascinating profusion and variety and vastness of the mound building remains in Ohio, I must not forget there are other regions of exceeding richness and special districts which closely rival any in the field I have been considering. And this fact, the existence of such rich fields widely remote from each other, is perhaps more convincingly assertive than any other of the immensity as regards numbers of the ancient race. As a close second in the plentifulness and interesting character of the remains to those in the Scioto Valley is a stretch of the Illinois bottom land extending along the Mississippi from East St. Louis southward. The side of St. Louis itself on the other side of the river was originally literally covered with mounds, while on what is called the American bottom, on the Illinois side, are over 200 within a comparatively small territory. In one county alone, Mercer, the tumuli, and other earth structures are estimated by conservative explorers to number at least 1,000. The monster mound of the whole northern or United States region, the Great Cahokia Mound, as it is called, is in this district, Madison County, Illinois. It stands in the midst of a group of 60 other tumuli and is a temple mound, one of the true teocalli, its features being in close analogy with those of the truncated pyramids on which the temples of Mexico were situated, and there can be little doubt that it once bore upon its lofty summit a great edifice similar to, but probably less magnificent, than those in which the ancient priesthood held their solemn and sanguinary religious ceremonies. Cahokia Mound, which is exceedingly well preserved, and the owner of which wishes to dispose of it to the government or to other custodians who will guarantee its future preservation, is a commanding elevation, upwards of 100 feet high, and extends in the form of a parallelogram, the sides of which measure 700 and 500 feet, respectively. The top of the great truncated pyramid is flat and divided into two parts, the northern end being a few feet higher than the southern, and the two surfaces having together an area of about 200 by 450 feet, containing 1½ acres. Oh my gosh. Upon the southern end, about 30 feet above the base, is a terrace or apron containing about 2 acres of ground. Just amazing. And upon the western side, at an elevation of 60 feet or thereabouts, is another broad terrace, though of less extent than the former. In the middle of the lower and larger terrace, at the base of the mound, is a projection supposed to be the remains of a graded ascent from the plain. The base of this colossus of the Earth's structures covers 16 acres of ground, and merely in the matter of superficial area, Cahokia is said to be the largest pyramid in the world, surpassing those of Egypt. The immense works, which have here been briefly described, with thousands more like them and some scarcely inferior in size, together with the innumerable tumuli that dot the valleys of the whole Mississippi basin, incontestably prove that a vast race dwelt there. The character of the works themselves, the profusion of implements and ornaments in stone, flint, and copper, the gorgets, bracelets, amulets, pipes, knives, axes, notably the pottery, and more than all else, the crumbling skeletons themselves, bear testimony to the fact that this race was one entirely distinct from the American Indians. This testimony is supported by diverse other significant facts, among which is the almost entire absence of tradition among the Indians linking them with the people who built the mounds. The Lenni, Lenape, or Delaware Indians, indeed, as an exception, had a legend of the Mound Builders, but it distinctly disavowed the descent of their nation from them, and asserted that they were a distinct and powerful people, through whose land they, the Delawares, had passed ages ago, after fighting a mighty battle with them. They called this people the Allegheny, which name, combined with Hane, or stream, has come by process of linguistic evolution, Allegheny, the name of the river which marks the eastern limit of the Mound Builder country. Whence came and whither vanished this mysterious race, this mighty current of the blood of the earth that seemingly only emerged from obscurity to flow into oblivion? A little light has been thrown upon these problems by the patient study of a few scholars. The consensus of opinion among the most thorough seems to be that the Mound Builders were of Oriental or Asiatic origin, and that they reached America by way of its western shore. Dodge a hijack. That's just, what they got to put out there to the mainstream. The major consensus, we can talk about a lot of major consensuses that were wrong. The recent find near Chillicothe is regarded by archaeologists as contributing a fragment of cumulative evidence to the mass of minute data supporting this theory of origin. As to the destiny of this race, or rather the direction of its passing from the field we have been reviewing, it seems highly irrational from a study of the earthworks, the mortuary remains entombed in them, and the various art objects which they enclose, to form any other opinion than that the nation gradually pushed its way down the valley of the Mississippi and eventually spread into Mexico, very likely occupying the whole stretch of the country from Lake Superior to the land of the Montezumas. Simultaneously, it is thought that for a considerable period they held all this country, relinquishing the northern portions of it reluctantly, and only under pressure of an enemy against whom the great works of defense we have been considering were raised. Or again, geological upheavals. Okay, so we just had volcanoes, earthquakes, storms, mud floods. From those storms, fires. Earth is a very Mama Earth is a very powerful thing. So the character of the earth remains denote a constant development as one follows them southward, while the root arts which the people practice, as for instance that of making pottery, are shown by the relics unearthed to have undergone a gradual but marked improvement in proportion to the distance southward at which they are found. It's exactly what I've been saying this whole time, bro. So as they move south, they got greater and greater over time. That's exactly what I've been saying. Man, the intuition is crazy, bro. So too, do the crania found in the mound sepulchres give evidence of a constant growth of the mound builder intellectually, indicating a considerable betterment of type as the race journeyed towards its destiny in Mexico. Thank you. Man, amazing. Perhaps someday the elaborate and accurately presented hieroglyphs and the masses of information preserved in such great works as Lord Kingborough, which cost its author besides his life $300,000, may be the means, in the hands of other scholars and writers on Mexican antiquities, of revealing the definitiveness, the secret of the Mound Builders' destiny and much of their history. But in the meantime, there is not wanting evidence from the side of Mexican history. Though incomplete and necessarily far from satisfactory, that the people who, in the northern United States and down the valley of the Father of Waters, reared the comparatively humble and yet massive earth remains, performed a prouder work and reached a higher civilization in the south as a competent part of the ancient Maya race. The fragment which, through one of the latest, was one of the strongest, amalgamated in the composite Maya people, was known as the Nahual nation, and there is evidence in their own history, as handed down through Mexican and Spanish authorities, that they came from the north, where they long had dwelt, from a land which they called Hue Tlapalan. Hue Tlapalan. That the Mound Builders were the Nahuals in the land of their long sojourn, the misty traditional Hue Tlapalan, was the region of the upper Mississippi and Ohio, the region in which their multitudinous monuments still remain to excite the wonder of a greater race, is pretty effectually argued by several students of American antiquities. One of the ablest authors who takes this view of the subject deduces from what has come down to our era and race of Maya history that the era of the exodus of the people from the north, or rather, the appearance of the Nahuals in Mexico, was the year AD 241, or 16 and a half centuries ago. If the Mound Builders and the Nahuals were identical, then we find that the people who built the mounds and fortifications of the north, and who then had in all probability no written language, finally became an integral part of a great nation which reared what are now the most splendid ruins of Mexico, left innumerable hieroglyphical writings, and who in time of Cortez were found to have approximated the true length of the year within 2 minutes and 9 seconds, thus rivaling the learned astronomers of the Orient, and that too while the nation of the conqueror and other Europeans were following a system of time measurement which had placed them nearly 10 days in air. So that was wrote by Alfred Matthews, and that last sentence was pretty important because it goes to show that while we had here in America our year within 2 minutes and 9 seconds, the Europeans were still following a system of time measurement which had placed them nearly 10 days in air. So it just really goes to show like the perspective that what's kind of been prevalent over this whole time period, what's still taught in schools. The history is completely falsified, and they're not really giving you what's true. They act like it's a mystery as far as who the Mound Builders are. It's not a mystery. It's not a mystery where the Mayans came from or the Aztecs. They came from Hue Tlapalan. They came from our supposed Mound Builders, and I think when we say Mound Builders, we're really disrespecting them by calling them Mound Builders because they are the originals, the origins of civilization. So just a quick little read. Wanted to give that to you. No, I know that nothing's quick for me, but yeah, this was just a quick one. But I don't know if you can see all these tabs up here. These are all Hue Tlapalan references, and some little dives here and there, but most of it is Hue Tlapalan. So we're going to be getting back into Hue Tlapalan and really nailing this home, to where we can start getting some responses back. We need some responses back from these schools. We need some responses back from some people who really, have a current agenda in place or storyline in place that's just not accurate. Because we can logically clearly see, and lots of us now have intuition to be able to understand. And yeah, we just got to pound it home. So I appreciate all of y'all. I love y'all with everything. Hue.